I wanted to give a presentation today. For the last 2 years, we've been working on a project, and it's here in San Juan County, and it's looking at the beaver populations. And I'm going to go through what we've been doing and kind of share some of the places that we've been monitoring, studying, and just giving you an idea of what beavers are doing here in the county, where they're located, and how their kind of habitat success and potential growth could interplay with other restoration that we're doing in our watershed here, such as abandoned mine lands cleanup. And so we'll talk through that, and we'll acknowledge several different partners throughout this. And then at the end, Jake from Mountain Studies is going to come up and share what Mountain Studies is doing, because we also collaborate with them. So welcome. Project goals for the last 2 years is to look at the impacts of beaver and mine impacted waters and also mine impacted landscapes across the San Juans. And we're trying to work with different collaborators and partners to look at solutions at kind of the intersection between beavers and areas affected by legacy mining. So not just the mine sites, but resource damages across the watershed. And then kind of expanding that into the role of beaver in mountain ecosystems. And I hope that you can come away with this realizing there's a lot of different partners, avenues, and funding sources that could reach these goals, which often seem to sit in their own pockets. But if we can do them collaboratively, we can probably make a bigger impact if we use, different efforts. So first off is what are the participating partners and funding sources that we've received? And the first one, most importantly, is really why we're putting this on tonight, is Water Infrastructure Improvements for the Nation. It's known as the WIN Act. This was grant money that Mark Rudolph, who's here from the state of Colorado, was able to get for San Juan County. And the grant money goes through Willie Tukey with the county, and we're able to use that money to do some of the sampling and monitoring specifically for this. In addition to it, all of these other listed partners have either provided time, resources, or funding in the last 2 years in the county, which is pretty impressive. So CDPHE, BLM, Lisa, and the Abandoned Mine Lands Program will touch on what they're doing. Division Reclamation Mining Safety, Kirsten Brown is here. We'll touch on some of their support. Of course, Mountain Studies. We've been working on the highway with CDOT. And then we've been working with the local and county governments. We're doing this also, just a little backstory. I've been doing this. This is my 20th year. I started in San Miguel County doing this work. And then ski areas, private landowners, there's other partners that are participating at different scales. Trout Unlimited, Ecometrics, we'll touch on Ecometrics here. Opinion Land Design is another consulting firm I use in Ridgeway. And then the last two is just throwing out in the future. So there's some potential things down the road. So folks here are probably familiar with natural resource damages funds. And so some of this kind of information might help you thinking about that future work that could happen in the county. And then Jake, maybe we'll touch on the Bureau of Reclamation. There's a Water Smart Drought Response Program. There's some grants funding that's been applied for relative to our watershed. So I think I want to give a quick background. This is a pretty knowledgeable crowd right here, but I'd like to touch on, well, what are we talking about the beaver? If you've read the book Eager, you should know these facts. If you haven't, you should read the book. And I think Lisa would agree. So backstory, Castor canadensis, the North American beaver. There were somewhere between 200 and 300 million beaver in North America before European arrival. And nearly every single stream was trapped from Colorado all the way to California in just about 20 or 30 years, maybe 40 years. So 1820, 1840, this is before the gold rush, this is before Silverton. And that population by 1900, they think was down to 100,000. It was real easy to, remove the beavers from the landscape. And so today we're back to maybe 15 million, which is, better, but it's 10% of historic. And they were found in every single watershed in the Western United States. And some studies have shown, for example, in Wyoming, headwater streams had up to 52 beaver dams per kilometer of stream in Wyoming. So that's like every 100 feet. there were beaver dams historically in some of these watersheds. And they shaped the entire landscape. We'll talk about that. So kind of, timeline progression of this, before there was any sort of westward expansion, you think about Lewis and Clark, you think about Louisiana Purchase, that westward expansion was really driven by the beaver fur trade. And so, the Europeans came out here, and I want to pause actually because I forgot to acknowledge that I want to first thank the Ute peoples, because this is the land that we're on. They were the original stewards of this land. And so we're on this today and acknowledging that they were the original, people of this land that we're talking about today. And so when the trappers came in, they set up westward expansion, and then the gold rush followed that. And so the mining era and the agricultural era of the Animas River Valley, those things were all after the beavers left. So what are the benefits of the beaver? Improve water quality, reduce sediment and turbidity. They can remove metals and contamination that's moving downstream. They reduce the rate of snowmelt, which can slow water runoff in the spring, keep flows higher later into the summer, which the ranchers like. Reduce the spread of wildfires, mitigate flooding, and the bottom two are kind of what we're talking about today, reducing the transport of mining contamination. Can we slow the movement of lead from a mine from going 1 mile downstream instead of 10 miles downstream through habitat expansion? And then resiliency to climate change is kind of an obvious thing. So next, what we have here is 2 pictures in 7 Mile Creek, Utah, where the beavers are been active, and on the right is where they have been excluded and allowed to graze. So just getting a difference between a winding river landscape and a very wide wetland area is the difference. Another example, if people haven't seen, this is from the Cameron Peak fire. This is Joe Wheaton at Utah State. The fire burned over the landscape, and even in the valley bottom, it burned through, except where the beavers were living. So there's a lot of research going on that's showing that they can actually provide fire breaks in areas because of the wetted landscape. I checked, water doesn't burn. The other big thing is they're not just an animal, they're an ecosystem. You maybe have heard of keystone species. And this is a great slide by Tori Ritter, a friend of mine at Montana, Department of Fish and Wildlife. And if you start to think about where beaver habitat is, everything else is there. In Colorado, 80% of all fauna utilize wetlands or riparian habitats at some point in their life. So if you care about birds, or if you care about moose or elk or otter, they're going to be also using this habitat that's being maintained through the beaver ecosystem. You could probably check with Wesley. Where do you most commonly get to take pictures? Where do tourists come to see pictures of the moose? When they stop on the side of the road, turn out to South Mineral Creek, they're looking at a beaver pond with a moose in it. So it does bring tourist economic benefits. Okay, so let's focus on the river. We're here, obviously, everybody in this room is aware of our tributaries, but we're going to kind of walk through the different 3 tributaries of the Animas, because they all have very different water quality and different conditions. But what we can see is the beavers are also in all of the different conditions. So this is where Matt went out this summer, and Jack some, and also Kylie Crevis, who's on the front side. I had an intern from University of New Hampshire here this summer, and she worked on this grant. They went out and mapped on CalTopo every place there's a beaver dam and active beaver habitat. So the black dots are where we are seeing beaver habitat right now. Now, we overlay that with Bonita Peak Superfund sites. The red dots are the 48 listed Superfund sites. We know there's a lot more than 48 mines, but that's the 48. So now if you double overlay them, it's pretty interesting that you see the beaver habitat in every single one of the watersheds where there's also mining activity. Just to give you an idea, in the upper Animas, we have they're co-mingled with these sites. And of course, there's an upper extent in all these places to the beavers, because once you get to alpine, there's no vegetation. So, but this is a cool one. This is, Rob, you're familiar with the Vermilion. We were up at the California Gulch, so above Animas Forks, down there sampling beaver activity in the willows above the Frisco Bagley. So that's how far they can get all the way up there. Pretty cool. Next. So what I think the easiest way to talk through it is we picked about 5 kind of focus areas where there's stuff going on with beavers and different water quality and things to focus in on. So we'll move through this map and start over in the Mineral Creek watershed. So this is the Chattanooga Fen along the highway, or Chattanooga Turn. This used to be a town of 100+ people during the heyday. And this is the landscape that's been historically influenced by beaver activity. And this arrow is these 2 ditches, which MSI has been working for the last 15 years, trying to restore the fen ecosystem there, which is a groundwater fed peat ecosystem immediately adjacent to this area. And what caught our attention, next slide, is Jeff likes this slide, is the Brooklyn avalanche paths are immediately across the highway here. And what we did in monitoring the last 2 years is that the beavers in the last 2 years or 3 years have been starting to build dams across the river here. And when we went and looked closer, we realized that they were actually using the large woody debris from the avalanche paths to create their base structure to put the dams in, which is a pretty neat thing. And one of the ideas here is if we could go in and do what's called post-assisted log structures, which is reinforcing some of these dams to give them a chance to continue year after year, that what happens through time as the beavers fill this in is it continues to widen the stream channel. So think about like that fire picture. If you have a wetted area, this is a schematic drawing, and you can just keep clicking through those. So if you go through the landscape and you think about a beaver trying to build a dam in a narrow channel, it's going to get blown out at high flow going left to right, because that one dam can't hold it up. Blows out and it widens the channel and creates a bit more of a floodplain. And then the series continues when they go back and do it again and over again, and it'll keep kind of going out. And eventually, the big thing that you have here is this blue line is the water table, and this is the land surface. So right now, when you have a channelized river, the groundwater is way down here. And if you follow the blue line, as you get closer to a healthy ecosystem, it brings the floodplain and the groundwater back to connect it with the river. And then the river ends up being a braided channel, which you can imagine water is going to move downstream much slower through this ecosystem over 10 miles, 20 miles, 30 miles. Since we're talking about Chattanooga, if you're going to promote or protect or expand beaver habitat, you have to acknowledge the existing infrastructure that's in place, because we all rely on the infrastructure. So if you have infrastructure like road culverts that might get plugged by beaver activity in the area, what can you do? This is inside the hairpin turn. The beavers live inside of the turn because that's fed by the warm spring groundwater. And so that water is warm all winter and they love it. And what they were doing before is CDOT had a grate over this, and they were going 4 to 5 times a year. The beavers were just plugging the grate, and they have to go and bring an excavator, next slide, and mobilize excavator to take that out. So what you can do instead for very low cost is build an exclusion fence around the culvert, which increases the surface area, and the beavers are far less likely to try to dam all of this surface area, and then they end up just leaving it alone. So this is exactly what we did for CDOT at the Chattanooga turn, and in the last 3 years, they have not returned once to clean that culvert. So that's a pretty significant immediate savings to the road budget. And if they did have to go back, it's a lot easier to clean debris here than to try to get something out of the inside of a culvert. Cool. So now we're going to jump from Chattanooga to Bandora in South Mineral. So this is the very healthy a multi-decadal complex here. And then we have video next, maybe. So this, Jack, do you want to say what this is?
Yeah, so this is the Bandura mine north of, if you're driving past Ice Lakes, and you continue out the road. And we did all of this drone imagery just to show you what a immaculate landscape this is when the beavers are thriving. And it's really unique because they are building this habitat right next to this area that has been an abandoned mine. And so we did studies up and down throughout the stream to show you, here's a great example of the mine up to the right, and the water moving through the draining mine, moving through down into the beaver habitat. And so essentially what the beavers have done here is slow down the process of this water moving downstream to allow for a filtration and to also hold it as water storage.
I think the next one's the locations. So sampling locations, this is the discharge of the mine water. This is upstream of the beaver complex, downstream of the complex. So what is really interesting here, the other thing I want to point out is people might be like, ooh, look at the color of that water. Folks know why the water looks blue in this area. You know which mineral makes the water look blue here? It's bluish or white? Aluminum. Yes. So there is a ton of aluminum coming into this complex from upstream. There are no major mines upstream. It's a natural background aluminum signal. But when we did chemistry of these locations, next slide, what's pretty amazing is blue is upstream, orange is the actual mine discharge, and green is downstream. And this is the concentration of different minerals. Aluminum, 4,000 micrograms per liter above the beaver complex. A little bit coming in from the mine, and almost no aluminum coming out of the complex. As you can see with iron, this particular area, the iron in the water all comes from the mine, right? So what we're starting to get, and the same with zinc, is that it's its primary being sourced, because this is concentration, not the load. So the mine is a very small flow, so it's not a lot of water. But what we wanted to do is start to quantify these numbers so that we can understand where are beaver living, can they handle this type of water, and what are some of the benefits of it. And so another thing to think about is the mine water has a lot of zinc and iron, but it also is a higher pH. And by the beaver pond bringing that higher pH water in, it helps bring the upstream pH from a 4.9 to a 5.7. This increase in pH is also what's driving that aluminum to drop out in the bottom of the mine workings. So again, this is all preliminary, 1 year just doing a few sampling, but nobody had really put these numbers to it in the context of beavers, not just looking at the mine by itself. Scott. Because the source of the groundwater that the mine is intercepting is different than the source of the headwater, because the geology differs. So yeah. And yeah, so now let's jump over to Cunningham. And folks are probably familiar with the Old 100, and BLM did a restoration project this summer, which we are going to try to find funding to monitor the success rates of this. So I'll show a little bit first of Cunningham. Cunningham's really cool because there's natural beaver habitat, and there's these really healthy pockets, and then these pockets where there's not as many beaver as there could be. And so as you're going up, one of the things that happens in mountain landscapes is that the infrastructure tends to go along rivers, right? And so roads can tend to squeeze valleys together, and we may not be able to move the road. So, that the width of this system may not get wider in certain places, but where the road goes out around, look how the beavers took every ounce of that landscape and connected the floodplain with a creek when they had the space. So just kind of strings and pearls. Old 100. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. This one we haven't gotten enough information yet to really understand how the beaver habitat is directly impacting some of the mine discharges. But, for example, we do know that there's a natural attenuation of zinc from upstream to downstream in Cunningham with beaver habitat. Whether the beavers are completely responsible, we don't know, but their habitat is definitely slowing the water down and allowing more time and potential for some of these metals to precipitate out is a likely scenario. And there may be some clean tributary water. But yeah. So the restoration in Cunningham that BLM's been working on, this is the project area. Jake put together this, and he could do a better job explaining if people have questions. But this is all of the places where different types of what we call process-based restoration. So orange or yellow squares are beaver dam analogs, and orange dots are post-assisted log structures. And I have a couple examples. So these are all places where BLM put in small structures to try to mimic what beavers would do to help slow the water down. And with beaver habitat existing adjacent and downstream to here, one of the hopes is the beavers will move into here and sort of take over this and start to, it gives them a little boost to start making that. And some pictures, next slide. You can see here, pounding in posts into the stream and then using associated vegetation and trees to basically wicker weave in. And so this is mimicking a beaver making it. And if this has a start, if it starts to slow the water down, the other thing is beavers don't want to be in shallow water. They want 2 feet of water at all times. That's how they protect themselves from coyotes. They swim under the water. So the more places that you have pools of deep water, the more likely the beavers are going to explore and move up and start to say, hey, if I make this dam bigger, now I've got more space, and it's kind of a continuing process. So Ecometrics was the firm that did the design on that as well, and they're out of Buena Vista. Just another idea of that same schematic. This is actually from a science article, and it's the same idea of slowly adding more dams and spreading out water to try to reconnect. And again, water table well below the incised channel, and eventually the water table comes back up and it allows the mixing and recharge and slows the water down moving through the system. Cool. Next one. This one's really fun. This is the North Star mine. So it's not a Bonita Peak listed site, but it's right here in town. And we've been working on that a little bit. There's been a cleanup action that's already occurred here with the EPA. And let's go back one. Mine had discharge, waste rock pile, creek. Before restoration, all this orange is where the water was going, coming out of that. And then jump ahead in 2020, Lisa was up here working on this, and the beavers actually decided to go to the mine portal and build a dam, and they were living in the mine. They were living in the pond above it. But the problem is this was causing water to back up on top of a waste rock pile and into a mine and spread water out across contaminated soils outside of it. So this was, in 2020. And so jumping ahead. So the beavers were actually trapped and taken out of there. They weren't killed before the dam came out. And then the waste pile, Rob and others were able to pull back the waste rock away from the creek so that it's not spilling into the creek. And then because of this reclaimed area, we had an idea of trying to, instead of just leaving it a barren landscape, well, what if we mimic what beavers would do and get some stuff growing here and see if those beavers come back, because they all live up here in South Mineral. And maybe they will come back and take these over and maintain these berms as beaver dams. And then it's like a settling pond that's passive, that doesn't require maintenance, because as the pond fills up with sediment, the beavers will build the dam higher. And so the water coming out of the mine now goes down a channel that's fenced out, so the beavers can't get to the mine again. And the first place they can access the water is here. And then it flows through these ponds through a series of direction to try to increase retention time. I think we have some slides. There's pretty neat information on the concentrations between the inflow and the outflow of the ponds. In every case of the metals, there's a reduction, some amount of reduction just by itself right now, and also an increase in the pH. Next one is, this is the series of ponds, 1 through 6. The SPC, specific conductivity, basically is an indicator of how much metals is in the water. Decreases through the ponds, pH increases through the ponds. So that series is just, this is baseline quantitative data that shows you that they're doing something. So next phase was Kirsten at the RMS was able to partner with the U.S. Geological Survey, and Dr. Thomas Chapman has these devices called mini sippers, which are an automated sampler that you can put out at a place and collect a sample every day or every week and just leave it, because it's a lot of labor to collect a sample every day. So this is continuous data at weekly intervals over a year, where from the adit and from the bottom of these reclaimed ponds. And what's really, just to give you an idea, iron is almost all out before it gets to the river. There's, oh, sorry, iron's here. Aluminum has about an 87% decrease during high flow. And then the same over here, we're seeing 50% less zinc. What's interesting is these spikes happen during high flow. This means that that mine is flushing. There's a quick inflow of snowmelt water and it's picking metals up and bringing it out of the mine. And when that spike comes out, it spikes up here, but at the same time, we're getting a reduction because of that slowing process through the ponds. Cool. And now it's Jack's turn.
Here's some more aerial imagery of the North Star. This is right out of town. So are you all familiar with where this is? So it's a pretty cool, as you're driving north on Highway 550, you can look left out your window and get a really good idea of this site and how we're trying to transform it into being an area that we can start to clean up the mine through our efforts, but mainly through Beaver efforts.
And part of the goal here was to preserve the historical look of the mine building structures and the waste rock pile. So it wasn't completely removed, but it was removed so that it's not in contact with either the mine water or the river. That was kind of part of the objective there.
So this is going to be kind of a slow process as we work on this site. And so what better way to get more help with our youth? So to make this educational, we worked with the summer school peak program. Thanks to Summer Harriet, she brought together the Silverton school, and we had about 20 students out to help us replant and revegetate all of the different ponds. So if the beavers are busy, we should be busy too. And really, we were just out there to make everybody a beaver believer, and to help people understand kind of how the beavers can really help this landscape. And so we went out in the morning of this day, and we harvested willows from the same owner. There's an owner that owns the
same owner of this area owns down by the
Pittsburgh mine. And so we harvested willows from the Pittsburgh mine. There's a big stash of willows all along the bank, and we harvested those willows in little like 2 to 3 foot sections. We cut them, and they're about 1 inch diameter. And we went out with the students and we planted them into the size of the bank. And so we went out with 20 kids and inserted the sticks into the water. And essentially that was to allow for root growth throughout multiple years. And that's going to help create a better structure for these ponds. And then also will help with the budding process to grow more willows. And willows are the food source for beavers. So essentially, if there's more food source, they can habitate there, and then they can also start to work more and live there. And that's our goal. And so this willow planting has gone on with MSI helped out and years before. And we came back last year and did just a quick study to see what was growing before we were going to plant more willows. And the willows that had been planted 2 years ago had come back. I think it was 80% of the sticks that were planted had re-vegged. And so anything from 10% and up is a success. So the fact that we had 80% regrowth was pretty amazing. So we decided, why not do more? So we're hoping to do more of this every year with the Silverton School, and just another way to get more folks involved and educate our youth.
Yeah, just to mention quick, so like this is a sprig, this is a branch off of a willow bush. So you can go to a willow bush and cut 5 branches off it, and the other 200 branches are going to keep growing. So you're not killing anything. You're just taking a few branches off a bush, moving them, and allowing them to regrow. In the natural ecosystem, willows move by flood events. So if a willow on a stream bank gets flooded and the branch breaks and washes downstream, that branch is going to stick into the next, floodplain area and start to regrow. Like that's natural process. We're just trying to speed it up because we need to get things growing here if we hope to encourage more wildlife. And we're also trying to set up game cameras here and let the students use them to see the different diversity of wildlife using these areas. And it's just a cool way to connect the community, and it's really close to town, and it's a safely accessible site. So that's kind of the goal there into the future.
And it was relatively quick. For one day, we did like 200 sprigs. And so that transference, that can grow significantly in the next coming years. And so every year after that, we could see this be a really successful re-veg.
Some projects have done in other areas. When they start going, we've actually gone in and put some fencing around it for a few years, because if the elk herd comes through and stops, they could hammer it pretty hard. So sometimes you can actually exclude and give it a chance to grow. Once a bush is growing, then it's okay to be browsed by the elk and moose. Cool. Now, so we've come down. We're going to jump into Mighty Monarch real quick.
This is a question.
Have you seen what the data there is awesome, and makes me think about all sorts of things. But are you seeing beaver activity return?
Yes. So I have pictures, and I think Rob's seen this too, up on the slope where we put the new channel. After the channel and ponds were put in, they came back the next year and chowed down some full-size aspens on the slope. So there was fresh beaver chew. We haven't seen them like build a lodge or anything yet, but too much for tonight. But there's a whole theory of strings and pearls and jumping stones. So where beavers may be moving up and down these river corridors, and if you can have these little pockets of places that are refugia, they can stop and chill and rest and eat. And it could also benefit beavers that are living in bank lodges a quarter-mile upriver. They may come down and just snack for a little bit. Even if they're not living there, it's still utilized by beavers, say the ones that are, upriver, half mile. Mighty Monarch, another BLM, soon to be town of Silverton location. We think. Who else speak time? So this is the Mighty Monarch and Kendall Beaver Ponds. I know I encourage some folks to come tonight because this is a great recreational pond. We'll talk about that later. But this pond, actually, a lot of people might not realize that there's a mine in the slide path up here called Mighty Monarch. It has perennial discharge that comes down here. It flows directly into the pond. There's also some groundwater inflow to this pond too. This groundwater inflow is probably alluvial groundwater related to the river itself. And then it comes through. So we just did a little bit of chemistry sampling there. And what was really interesting is that the mine discharge water, again, had a higher pH and had lower metals. Blue is the mines in this time. So in this case, the mine discharge actually doesn't have any of these metals in it. These metals are in the groundwater coming through the system already. And so In this case, the beavers are actually utilizing a permanent water source that's of better quality, even though it's from a mine. But it allows that mine water to mix in as well, and it becomes part of the groundwater that's moving, through the pond system back towards the river. Unfortunately, Matt is not here today. He's sick. He's online, but he helped with a lot of this mapping, thanks to Lisa's encouragement to kind of look at this complex. We're going to call it the Lower Cement Creek, the LCCPC. This is a super active beaver complex. As soon as you head up County Road 110, right at the end of the pavement, it's way down over the cliff. And slide ahead. Oh, that go backwards. What we wanted to start showing here is Cement Creek is not the prettiest water, but the beavers are in Cement Creek and they're living there, and we know it's got degraded water quality. We've got mine water above. This is probably the biggest source of some of our metals, comes through Cement Creek towards the watershed. So what we were doing on the metals was just getting background information. This is the quality of the water. The beaver are living here, to first dispel a myth of, oh, beavers can't live in orange water. And then what's interesting here is, again, there's also a perennial draining mine, small one in here, and they've chose to make their active lodge and pond utilizing that perennial source by damming it to make deep enough water they can live there. And then they've expanded it down to now doing channel-wide dams, and their goal, I presume, is to actually reconnect this whole area with the river to create, a habitat and a floodplain and bring the water up and through these ephemeral ponds. And so we're trying to watch this and see how it goes. What's amazing here is the beavers are going up hundreds of feet uphill to get the aspen trees, to bring them back down. You've probably seen them chewing up next to the sign on the road, right there. They were chewing like crazy. But right now, they don't have any aspen or willow in the riparian area because it's been dried out. We've got all this overgrowth of spruce down in the river, and the spruce shouldn't really grow in a riparian habitat. When the groundwater table's high and it's wet, spruce won't live in there. In the last slide, actually go back, you can see them living, the spruce are starting to die off, and then this will, through forest succession, should come back as deciduous vegetation, the willows and the aspen and things in that area. So it's just kind of a cool thing to monitor how that succession occurs. Just some pictures of the habitat and places where they put a pond in for a while and had it. And look at all of this iron that's precipitated out of this pond on the side. This iron would have been just flowing down the river. So it's now settled out, it's out of the way, it's not in the stream. It's just kind of an interesting thing to think about.
And these ponds actually were full when the dam was constructed, before it blew out during the spring run out. The ponds were full of water. And so that's showing that spread out of the stream.
Yeah, so during the winter time, the stream was going all the way through the whole area. During high flow, it blew out, but you can just see visually what was precipitating out and staying in that area. I won't spend too much time. Anglo-Saxon. That's pretty cool. That the imagery is post removal of the wall. And so this one is a pond that was put in, a man-made pond that was constructed to try to deal with this mine discharge. This is where the crib wall fell down this year. It was removed, it's gone. And there's beaver activity all over this habitat area here connected to it. They've started to put small dams in here, and they tried to dam across the river several times. So it's just another landscape where you can imagine if the beavers were in this whole river system, everything from here to here would be wet, and you wouldn't see spruce up against the river channel. Because currently the river channel is moving too fast. It's incising and it's dropping the groundwater and drying it out. So here's pictures of the beaver activity right next to the mine, where they've done those channel dams, etc. Same thing here, just starting to get some quantitative data. What is the change from the at it to where it enters the stream. And we are seeing some reductions without really that much. Imagine if there were 7 ponds in that stretch instead of the one little one. Just thinking ideas. We're not saying that's the answer. Okay. How are we doing on time?
40 minutes.
All right, we're more than halfway through, so we won't make you sit too long. This is the Pride of the West mill. And this is what the water looks like below the tailings right now. And I think the same thing, we've got this is just aerial imagery. Mine, our mill, tailings, active beaver habitat in every little corner that they have access to right now without anything, right? So we just want to, it's kind of cool to see this from above. When you're driving down the road, it's kind of hard to see the extent of this landscape. So coming down from Milton, super healthy, cut off. What happens here is the mill put a berm in, and so the river's forced over here. So the river has to stay here now, and it's going to continue to move fast. It's going to continue to drop and drop and drop and drop, and in size, if it stays in this configuration. So just pointing that out. And then I think we have a video. This just helps me kind of picture the scale that you can't see when you stand on the road of healthy habitat in these big flat areas, and then different levels of impact from the mining legacy. And this is looking upstream, very healthy. This is probably some of the healthiest habitat up to Middleton in the whole watershed.
That's a beaver lodge that they've started to house in.
And so this site is listed under the Superfund site. So there's a process going on to determine if and what cleanup may happen here. So we're not promoting any particular thing. We're just trying to get locals to understand like what it looks like in the area. This is jumping uphill to the Kitty Mac tailings. So Kitty Mac tailings right in here. This has been cleaned up and burned. It was mixed with the sludge from the treatment plant, made into a berm. You might say, wait, what is this? This is the historic rail spur over to the mill. Because of the historic nature of the rail spur, we were not able to remove the tailings underneath the railroad ties. So that's the tailings that's there. But what's really dramatic in this is look what the railroad grade has done to split the landscape for 100 years. This is the old railroad grade, right? And so what one thing you can think about is you can say, well, this looks all dry, but in a flood year, right, the water can move here, but this becomes the barrier to the width of what's potential as a floodplain to absorb the water coming down. So now hitting on infrastructure again, this is, I call it the forest queen culvert. I don't know if there's an appropriate name. This is just above past Cole Ranch, but before Eureka. So it's lower end of Eureka. I don't know what you want to call it, but that's the county road. That's the culvert. The historic river bed comes underneath this road. And in the springtime during high flow, you get a ton of water over here. And sometimes the road floods and we have to use the side county road to go around it. But this culvert is allowing that water to get back to the main river channel. And what's been happening recently is the beavers have come in and started plugging the culvert. So that becomes a hassle for the roads crew because they need to protect that infrastructure. If they plug it all the way and it gets washed out, that's a problem. So we decided, we were able to get the chance to try another one of these fences, and we figured it was 10 degrees on December 12th. We said, let's go out and do field work. So,
Ideal time to do this. There's no one on the roads. Yeah.
So we went out and we constructed another one of these trapezoidal fences in front of this culvert, the same way we did at Chattanooga. And then next spring, when the beavers get active again, if they want to come and try to plug this, if they do, they're going to go around the fence, which one, you can get to and clean up if it's too much. Two, we could actually add a phase 2 to this and put pipes out of the fence that have cages on them and actually regulate the flow that the beavers cannot stop at all. So there's another phase. But phase one means that the road and bridge should not have to come back and get into that culvert now to get the sticks out that are going to show up in the spring because the beavers are still there. So that was literally just a couple weeks ago that we tried that. And then I think pretty much wrapping up, I don't want to kind of go into too much. We haven't done statistical analysis. We have the minimal number of samples. But what we wanted to kind of start to think about quantifying is what are the thresholds for metals concentrations in the water based on water quality standards for the state. So for example, a chronic standard to aquatic life, so that's the bugs and the fish, for zinc is 400 micrograms per liter, just as an estimate. We'll get specific on it. And within the places that we sampled, we have zinc up to 12,400 micrograms per liter in active beaver ponds where the beavers have chosen to live there. We didn't put them there. So what we're starting to demonstrate is that even though this level is chronic to trout habitat, the beavers are clearly okay with much higher levels. So one of the things I've been asked in recent years is, well, is there a toxic effect to the beaver, right? Like, is the beaver getting hurt by the metals? And the one thing that we're trying to study is that uptake. We want to study the beaver tissue to see if they're accumulating it. But from first look, the beavers are terrestrial because they eat willows. They don't eat fish. So the things that they're ingesting is from the plants on the land, not from the fish in the water. Whereas the fish are eating the bugs sitting on the stream bed, which are just soaking up that zinc all the time. So that's where it gets confusing because people will throw the beavers into the same, wildlife scenario as fish. But if they can handle these, they may be a tool in some of these areas that, hey, the beaver, this water's bad. This mile of watershed, it may never have trout in it. But if the beavers are living there and can reduce some of these levels, maybe the next 3 miles downstream has a better chance of becoming a fishery than the area itself. So it's kind of thinking about ecosystem function and landscape scale or river mile scale, where some of these activities of the beaver may not bring back trout to, a certain section of Middle Fork of Mineral Creek, but if they can reduce some of the loads, it might improve the fishery, in the canyon at Elk Creek or places downstream. So trying to think about separating them from just saying, oh, water's too bad for fish, we can't have animals. And again, I won't go into detail, but we've looked at metals, all the sites, so that we have an idea of these concentrations, because for the Superfund cleanup, the target goals are looking at those levels, and they're very specific state guidelines for aquatic habitat. There isn't a state guideline that says clean up for the beaver. And so we're just trying to build a database that we can think about those things. And then Matt wanted me to throw this in. This is super cool. Colorado State just used an artificial intelligence-based tool for managers, and they're now using AI to take high resolution imagery, and the AI is telling us where the beavers are. And this was done after we did the mapping, and it almost exactly maps where we found physically on the ground all the yellow circles where the beaver activity. We have dug into this. There's some areas that it's missing, which maybe we could help to improve that tool where they are not seeing it. But that just gives you an idea of in the future, there's going to be scale up to this potential study through the use of AI and large data set and large imagery monitoring. So yeah, next steps, more robust data sets, chronic exposure to the beaver. If anybody knows a beaver biologist that wants to do tissue studies, awesome. And then terrestrial impacts, the baseline ecological risk assessment for Bonita Peak did not say that there was a terrestrial impact to beavers. There's not a lot of apparent uptake, say, of lead in the willow to the point where they shouldn't eat the willow. Partners, the multi-phase of enhancement. So thinking about stacking, funding, cycling, and sources, right? Like the money's not always available today, But if you start and you have a data set and you have a place like North Star, something could come along next year that furthers the ability to have funding to take more school groups out and educate more people. So thinking about these as stacked layers, it's not just one, it's not just the EPA money, it's not just state money, but it could be different sources and different groups. And we've started to talk to private landowners as well, who are interested in encouraging this habitat on their land. And every beaver pond's not going to solve the problem, but 500 beaver habitats over 20 miles could have a big impact, but it's going to take time. And then for the crankers, Silverton, this is the Mighty Monarch Beaver Pond. It's sourced by mine impacted water, and it is a tremendous benefit to our recreational community right now because we get to play hockey on it. And it's a pretty beautiful spot. So I have some more things and I want to leave time for questions, and I want to have Jake have a chance to tell you what other things that Mountain Studies Institute is doing. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you. Any specific questions besides the geochemistry details that we can get into? Oh, I got one here and then Scott.
I have a question. Yes. Could you share arguments? There's a proposed development in one of the areas discussed at Chattanooga, building a human lodge and a 60-car parking lot as well. And it currently has the support of County Commissioners Austin Lashley and Pete Meisel. And could you share some arguments for citizens who would like to protect the beavers?
Yeah, it's not my place to basically comment on any sort of political zoning. The first thing I would say is look at the topographical map and make sure that the areas of concern are, we have federal protections for things like wetlands and riparian habitat, and that we have to have faith in that system because that's how the system works. So if there's proposals for development and things in areas that are wetlands, then that's the Army Corps of Engineer process, which I don't really have a part in. But in terms of the habitat expansion, the areas we're particularly specifically have studied in this are not within the footprint of these development posed areas. They're adjacent. I know what you're talking about. They're adjacent to the areas, but that's, I guess the encouragement is, where are the areas that we want to see healthy, and the development is a different question from what nerdy scientists are studying. Well, if you have the funding, Jake and I are happy to study it. We know we've got the labs, we can do the modeling. So we can help, we're happy to help in that capacity if it comes up. We've actually done private landowner studies for folks that have mining claims and want to get building permits on mining claims. We've actually gone out and collected water quality data that then they bring as part of their application process, which is set up within the government structure. So those are the things we can provide. We can't comment on the decisions on the zoning or approvals. But yeah, Scott.
It's going to sound kind of blunt, but are beaver protected? Are they considered to be a small game animal to be shot? Because that's one of your biggest dangers in this area, I think. The beavers is either people destroying habitat, and then the county is guilty of that, which we're trying to come up with some real creative solutions as far as filling road beds up. Beaver pond isn't flooding the road.
Yep.
So I think that was a good solution, but I know there was an incident in the valley where a landowner came and just wiped out all the beaver ponds. How do we keep them from doing that? How do we does the beaver game be shot?
Yeah, I mean, we can't control you can go to your legislators and work on beaver hunting and trapping policies, but really it's a cultural shift in perspective. And that starts with the kids coming in and learning about the benefit of beavers. And as that generation grows up, I mean, I think personally, my guess is that the beavers are doing better here because there's less people shooting them than there might have been 30 years ago. Right. And that hopefully that's through everybody in this room knows other people, right? So it's a communal effort to like think about it from those first few slides of like, we have a real problem with our history starting in 1874 in Silverton, right? We don't think a lot about the fact that trappers came in and completely changed the watershed with no documentation, nothing. And then everybody that showed up, every European that showed up saw the rivers without beavers. And that is the image of what we think in our culture. And so it's really hard to go back 200 years. We need to be creative to be like, hey, you know, when a fisherman wants to walk up to a meandering stream with no bushes to whack through and fish, that's not necessarily perfectly natural system. And it's really hard other than hopefully using imagery like flying over and saying, look at this area here. This is healthy where the beavers are. This is what the river channel would look like. And then I think that becomes an educational thing. And then when you can show defense mechanisms like the fencing of the culverts and put money to it and say, every time you don't have to have an excavator clean that culvert out, that's X number of dollars. And so there's dollars and cents, I think, start to come into play economically on the benefit of that. So you have to balance habitat expansion and preservation with acknowledgement of infrastructure protection. And I chose not to for this crowd, but I've been working on that for 20 years in Telluride. And they have beaver ponds that are 4 feet away from $10 million houses. And they have been regulating the water levels in those ponds for 20 years, and not one basement's ever flooded through low-tech pipes and systems that I kind of touched on. And so there is ways and examples of that where there's a coexistence. So I think you need to grab those examples and share them with other people. And so I don't know, I don't have a good one answer, but that's the hope. Jake.
Yeah, two things to that. So this year, CPW added the birds as tier 1 species of interest, which means that 4 projects here the highest priority, or they're part of the species that are highest priority. Colorado is also working on a new beaver management plan. We're thinking 2010 to 25 and 26. So there's a shift, but they're also a rare species, which means you can have them.
Yes.
I want to comment a little bit on that. Just you showed a slide earlier on, whatever I wanted to mention, especially for our kids and stuff. And that is all of the different wildlife that actually depend on areas where the beaver come in. And I've only been here 15 years, so some of that's true. Tell me way better going farther back. But I've seen dramatic increases in the number of beaver and wildlife. And of course, the moose population, where elk and all these other animals that thrive in that kind of ecosystem, whatever, the moose numbers have expanded dramatically in that time period. So it's like the beaver, we were talking about kind of mining and all that kind of stuff, but in terms of other wildlife and stuff like that, if you care about that, beaver are actually incredibly important, for those other animals, birds, and all the other animals that thrive in these wetland environments.
Yeah, I mean, where do you see people going fly fishing? Oh, when you drive up County Road 2, they park and they walk to the beaver ponds and they're fly fishing in the beaver ponds. And people are like, oh, well, it's not an open river channel. There must not be habitat. Well, I'm pretty sure that the beaver and trout evolved on a long time scale, so the trout were in these rivers when there was 50 beaver dams a mile. So it doesn't actually, so they can, and I think reminding folks, hey, if fishing's what you care about, there's another reason to care about beaver. If the pictures of moose is what you care about, you can find a lot, bird watching, whatever it is, quiet, green landscapes. I think that's something we can promote as a community, because we know tourism has a benefit to our community. If these are the aspects, how do we promote that and educate at the same time why that attraction is here? I think it's going to be a process, hopefully. But Jake, do you want to come up now? Because we're ready for yours, and folks online aren't going to be able to hear unless they're through this mic.
Thank you so much for that. That was an incredible talk.
Limited clip for you.
One other thing to add to that is we've actually stopped calling them keystone species. We're now calling them engineering species. And that's because not only do they impact the wildlife that's around there, they're actually creating new habitat and creating landscapes. So they're incredible species. I'd also say like big kudos to AWR. Living in this town is it's quite amazing. Like the number of intelligent people that you walk upon, the conversations that you have on the street here is quite amazing. I feel really blessed to be a part of this community. So happy to be here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the places that we can go with these ideas. So why do we need to do restoration? There's a number of different reasons. And here are some examples behind me. Maybe you have some big infrastructure. This is actually down in Durango, Santa Rita Park. You need to protect some of that infrastructure and you can build recreation. Maybe there is severe incision, which we talked about earlier. You're down cutting, you're getting disconnected from your floodplain. You're not getting those benefits, the ecosystem services. Maybe there's some big mining impacts. This is actually what we thought could have been an unplanned mine spill. Well, it was just an ice dam on the Animus, and we saw this big plume come down. Actually, no, that was the dredging of, I won't talk about it. Or this is what we call a bowl. I'll go back one, please. Or on the top, this is down in Mesa Verde National Park. And this is what we call a bowling alley river. Rivers should not be straight. They should be complex. They should be mixed if they can, right? There are many instances where they abut against infrastructure or someone's home. We want to protect that infrastructure. Maybe there's an intake. Maybe there's a house, farm, agricultural. We're not trying to do things in those places, but in areas where we have the ability to expand and increase complexity, we should. Rivers should not be straight. They should be as crooked as my spine. I have scoliosis. Okay, so Rory brought this up in a number of different pictures, and this actually comes from a really great paper, Kluwer and Thorne, 2014. It's this idea of stage zero, and that's what we're trying to get to. And there's a number of different ways that you can get to stage zero. And this is actually a whole different dichotomy of how does a stream channel degrade and come back around. So starting at the top, stage zero, which is our target goal, we have either a complex anastomosic system, which means like mixed, braided, branched system. It could be woody, it could be grassy. And we like that it has complexity, it has connection to the floodplain. It's really positive for ecosystem services. In many cases, we start to see degradation. It could be because of grazing, infrastructure, lack of ability of water to go into the ground. We call that lack of infiltration. And so that increases our velocity, and velocity starts to erode, and we start to excise. And it starts to get degraded like this. And a lot of our systems are actually kind of stuck over here in this channel. But through restoration, sometimes we can get back towards our stage zero. But what I want to point out is it's not always going to fill back to the top. And in some cases, which you can see over there in stage 8, we can establish a new floodplain and a new hydrologic connection, or stage zero, within that inset. Sometimes I work in systems that are 15 to 20 to 30 feet in size, like seriously almost as tall as this building. You're not going to get back to the top. Maybe in millennia you will, but in our time scale, it's not going to happen. So being realistic about your restoration goals is really important. Okay, next slide, please. So how do we pick where to do our restoration? We're really lucky to have the products that AWR supplied. That's one way to go about it, and that's probably the best, is to get your boots on the ground and look at what's happening. But in these large landscapes, another way to go about it, or to prioritize your time on the ground, is to do some geospatial analysis. So Julia, who's here, and a colleague of ours at Western, we put together this AHEAD project. It was the goal was to literally get ahead of federal funding, to have plans in place. And so we took all available geospatial data, recreation, management, vegetation, watershed, wildlife, to create some sort of an output that tells us, hey, where are the ideal locations? So in the next slide, you can see the product that we have for San Juan County. So red is a high priority for restoration, and green is a lower priority. And we see some hot spots, and Rory's work actually coincides really well with our geospatial products, which is great. That's called confirmation. We really like that in science. When scientists think the same thing, we're like, oh, we're onto something. This is great. So we see South Mineral, that's a big highlight. The Animus, Chattanooga is a big one, and the Upper Animus. Those are all locations that we're really interested. So I'm going to highlight some places that we've actually already applied for funding to hopefully do some of this type of restoration. So someone actually just brought this up. This is the Bonanza Boy mine. And actually MSI has been contracted by this individual to help improve wetland habitat, which is really interesting. So this gentleman, and I am only a proponent of restoration. That is the only thing I'll say on that matter. I'm only a proponent of restoration. What I will say is that he's incredibly willing to listen to science. Anytime that we have said, hey, that makes no sense, he said, okay, what should we do? Or who should I hire? It's a crazy project, that's all I'll say on that, but he has been really great at listening to the scientists. So here we've got what we call riparian wetland restoration in blue, the darker blue, and then stream restoration in light blue. So that area over there is actually the side of the mine. And then Chattanooga is here, which you guys saw earlier. And this is an area that we're looking to restore the channel. It's actually quite in size there. And process-based restoration, colloquially known as PBR, not Pabst Blue Ribbon, is the methodology that we're trying to implement here. And so what really is process-based restoration? Well, we're trying to stimulate a positive feedback loop of natural processes. The two natural processes that we're trying to stimulate are either one, beaver recruitment. If we could get beaver in there, they're engineers. They'll do the work for us. So I quite literally make affordable housing for beavers. That's my job. I hope they come in, I subsidize their living, and they take it from there. No rent. The other process, if beavers aren't present, is wood recruitment. So in a lot of places I work in areas where beavers aren't around, there's ranching pressures. And so if I can get woody debris to accumulate, it's actually the same process. And those actually expand to the floodplain, as we saw. That encourages riparian growth. We get expansion out, that debris comes in. What happens? Well, it goes to the side. So all of a sudden you stimulated a positive feedback loop. So we say process-based restoration. We're encouraging these process-based feedback loops. Next slide. So this is the more advanced schematic that I drew up for that Bonanza Boy site. This is a really challenging area, actually. What's interesting is over here we have an immaculate beaver complex. There are no beaver up here. It's very interesting. Anybody got any guesses? I have a couple. Why there wouldn't be beaver there? I think it's avalanches. Yeah, I mean, how are you, like, this is the Chattanooga shots, right? It's a fun place to ski, but slide often. Hard to live under that. So we're thinking maybe not beaver dam analogs or post-assisted log structures, but instead large rock structures that are very similar to try to build and get water back up onto this floodplain, which has been heavily impacted. And you can see there's big willows. They're taller than my head. So if we can reestablish that, it would be amazing. Lower down, I haven't bid on the contract yet. So not sure about the lower parking lot area. Here we've got Cement Creek, is that right? Yeah, Cement Creek. So Roy's touched on this earlier. We've got these two sites that we were interested in applying for. We submitted funding for the Bureau of Rec. It's called B2E, Drought Resilience Fund. We're hoping to also leverage NRD if it's applicable. There could be some restrictions on these sites. Next one. And then this is the town of Silverton. This is a really rough schematic of what we're interested in doing in the river corridor area. This would be kind of a co-management situation where hopefully we could do restoration that improves wetlands, but also improves recreation. Can we get some ponds in there? Can we bifurcate Cement Creek to keep away some of these Cement Creek so that folks can hang out in the Animus? Very rough sketch right now. Right there. So that's, I need to grab my tea, I'm so sorry.
And this one is like, yeah, around is Iverson. This is our neighbor to the north. And this is in partnership with the other Aubrey Watershed Partnership. Anybody know Crystal Lake?
Yeah, they drained it.
They drained it. No, it's under it. No, it's a fen. It's a giant fen. Rory pointed this out earlier. It's a groundwater accumulating, a peat accumulating system. You know what peat is? It's not your buddy down the road. What's peat? Big soil, take that, maybe not even better. This is class, come on. Carbon.
Organic matter.
Yeah, it's partially decomposed organic matter, right? Peatlands represent 3% of the global land surface. Anybody got a guess on how much forests represent? There's no grade series. It's like free time. Go higher, maybe 15, 30, 33, 38. 38% is now forest. Peatlands store double the amount of carbon that forests do globally. That's crazy. That's mind blowing to me. So we're talking about trying to restore that. There's some issues with water rights there. This creek here, I don't know if you've ever driven by it.
I call it Rocky Mountain Gatorade. It looks like orange. Yeah, I wouldn't drink it though. Don't do that. Sometimes I go skiing at Silverton Mountain. I see people like washing their face in Cement Creek, and I'm like, whoa, that's a call. Don't do that. So big improvements to be made there. We've got 2 additional fens. We applied also to B2E for that as well. So just highlighting some projects that are ongoing. And then I want to show you some restoration work that we've actually done. On the left again is Mesa Verde National Park. You can see the incision, and we're about halfway there. That's after 2 years. We started that project 2 years ago. We're about halfway to getting back onto the floodplain. This is on Mountain Ute lands. So both these projects support tribal partners, which is really amazing. And this next one is one of my favorites. This is on private lands. This is a fully indigenous crew. This is with Ancestral Lands Conservation Corps, and it is to support traditional harvest for the Utes. So they come up, they can actually get the species that they would like off of these private lands. So it's a really great way to have some sort of reciprocity for the lost lives and land. I was amazing. It was amazing to be a part of that, to be honest. This is that same bowling alley. Does anybody see these are pals? Like just barely making it out. And so we designed these for actually kind of like medium to low flow. High flows, it's going to get right over, but we are so close to making it over bank. Again, this is just 2 years of work. We're already seeing the benefits. That's all I got.
Jake, do you want to have any special for you? Nate?
I guess, you guys both, chatted about energetic influences and, deficits might be involved. Can you chat about how our only permanent active mine in San Juan County is the rock quarry out at Middleton, which has obviously, influenced flow of Cannabis River as well as, local groundwater levels. Can you speculate on how that may be a benefit or a deficit to our potential restoration efforts and or beaver habitat?
I don't want that one.
They're mining in a floodplain, and so the groundwater is going to be close to the surface. And if we bring the groundwater up another foot, we're going to have to pump more water to get to the rock. But the landscape that's being mined for the gravel is already there. I don't know. Yeah.
There are benefits to gravel quarries. I mean, it has to store that habitat. Eventually, you are left with a lake.
Yep.
And I see that as awesome. We just traveling along like
And
70 fast train junction.
That brings up a great point. I was recently at International Beaver Con in Boulder last month, and they've reintroduced beaver in Wales, in Scotland, and England. They were gone from the landscape there for over 1,000 years because that's a much older developed landscape, and they've started bringing them back. And they're actually using abandoned quarries as starting points for reintroducing the beaver using that habitat. So there's an example of it actually coming back to be a benefit. So yeah, there is a lifespan of those, and then at the end, it could become an open water habitat source.
So I'm just curious, the beavers who got relocated from the mine, where did they go to? Where'd you put them?
In the north side.
Well, a little family here, we put the first one in the Gulch, being approved by CPW and our wildlife. They do have to approve their landing zone, it's appropriate choice for them to go. So we did the first one there, and that was on the Chadwick, I was working with Chadwick. And
We can probably cut it off and go back to the talk or to the meeting. And then I should talk.
His best advice was to, as soon as you have them, get them resettled and not leave them in the chat. There's some backlash because, then.
Yeah, just and then turn the camera on.
The second year, we knew it was there and wouldn't come out. And totally avoided the traps. So smart, so smart, and we ended up actually finding him dead. Unable to clean up dead inside when Terry got him from EPA. So it wasn't like the happiest story, but it was interesting.
I just wanted to give folks online a chance, if you have any questions, please ask or type in the chat now that we've stopped presenting. And I understand you may not be able to hear some of the conversation back in the crowd, but we can try to help you out if you have questions. The one thing I wanted to say on that, and then I'll take Rob's question as well. Now I lost my train of thought. So we're doing another project right now on Highway 550 for CDOT at Purgatory. There's a very large culverts there that are 10 feet in diameter that actually convey the water to Electra Lake from Cascade Creek. So it's actually water from our county going to another county. And that water goes under Highway 550 near the parking lot to Purgatory. Last summer, we discovered a 7-foot tall beaver lodge and dam inside the culvert. A family of 5 beavers were living underneath the highway that you're driving down to get your groceries. And CDOT, same thing. They said, we can't have this infrastructure protection. We need to get the debris out of there because we can't flood this large, it's a major structure. And same thing though, we needed to remove the beaver before we put an exclusion into the culvert. So in that case, we were working with Give a Damn Beaver in Durango, who has a trapping license, trap the beaver, move them to an immediately adjacent habitat, and at the same time, put the exclusion fences in so that we're not actually killing or getting rid of any beaver. We're just saying, hey, you got to live over here. You can't live under the highway. So that's another attempt to there's no lethal action in order to get to our goal of infrastructure management. I think Rob had a question.
Great presentation, thanks, Marie. What's on the horizon for the toxicological studies? Find out.
Where I'm still lobbying to find biologists that are able to come down and do that. That was part of my promotion at BeaverCon. I started working with Dr. Emily Fairfax, who's now at the University of Minnesota, and we're trying to identify someone there that can do some biological tissue studies. There may be some opportunities at Colorado State as well, because that's the agricultural institution for the state. We haven't come into contact directly with someone, so we're encouraging people that might have that avenue is something that we would like to test. Is that where you're kind of?
Is there funding available for that?
Yeah, I mean, we'd be looking for both, but, tagging up with an R1 research institution, if this is of interest to a biology department, there's also academic avenues to get research funding that we could collaborate with. And that's one of the things that Jake and I try to do, is that we don't have big universities and research and a lot of colleges in the southwestern part of the state. And so we have to work really hard to make these collaborations. And, Jake coming from the Colorado School of Mines, and I still work with the University of Colorado, and trying to basically say, hey, we'll provide the landscape, we'll provide the paints, you come make the watercolor, and so that's the thing a community can do, is trying to say, hey, we don't have the researchers here, but it's a great place to come do summer research. Making it more welcoming, whether it's through the permitting process, for them to be able to do work on federal lands, or maybe it's on, private or local county lands. I think that's the process that we can think about, and then make it easier for those people to come in is kind of a hope. But I don't have an immediate funding source right now on that avenue.
Maybe outside the Silverton site, the San Juan's are actually a research desert. We have some of the lowest density of data points for hydrologic data, biological data, so it's like a really pushing.
That just because it's so isolated.
It's isolated, and our universities, Fort Lewis and Western, which are two primarily undergrad institutes, they don't have robust academic graduate programs.
Have you reached out to the CPW?
So I met with CPW at BeaverCon. And because Governor Polis has mandated that they put together a statewide beaver management plan, they're feeling pretty consumed with that right now. And the response was that is likely to be a year or two process. And once they get that going, that they anticipate considering, these type of components as part of building that out. And that was the same response from Colorado Department of Transportation, is they said, we're going to let CPW develop the statewide management plan. And once that's in place, we hope to make a highway specific management plan that says, when we have beavers, this type of culvert, here's the manual. The same way that DRMS has a plan that says, if there's an open mine, this is how we put a closure on it. So it's kind of a phase thing. And because that's just come into play with CPW, I think that was the response I got, that they intend to do that, but it's a few steps. And I think Jake probably knows, Colorado seems to be a very progressive state, but in some of this beaver stuff, we're actually way behind Utah, Wyoming, Montana, in terms of the research on beavers, Utah State and Montana, and, bringing in, different diverse perspectives too. Like, we need to figure out how to work with the ranchers as well. It's not just the mining communities. There's a lot of landscapes. And so I think it's just all collaborative kind of education is the hope. But I don't see, no one has a question online. So Lisa, one more, and then I don't want to go over because I know people are hungry.
BLM has prioritized restoration areas for BLM habitat, and two that rose to the top were area that you mapped there on Hancock down, and then Snow Creek, and then also the area that you talked about at the confluence of Placer and California. So we went and looked at all of our sites that came up with the priority list, and we looked at those two with ecometrics when we were trying to figure out our best project area. And Cement Creek, ecometrics was very unenthusiastic about Cement Creek because of the geologic cut of the valley, and that it didn't suit beavers. And so that's something I think we should talk about as a community too, because it's such a great opportunity there. And then at the confluence of California and Placer, that's another, I think, community talking zone, because it's a great spot. Most of these spots are really solid BLM, with the exception of just a couple of spots. So we can actually move there. We can do things without having to work with everyone. But at California and Placer, there were fens on the periphery, and BLM was uncomfortable impacting those fens. And so we threw that out of the priority list. But hearing your discovery, I haven't heard that yet, I think we should talk too about that interplay between fence zones and beaver groundwater. How do we get comfortable culturally?
Yeah.
Mixing those two and watching them go back and forth maybe. But we should talk about.
Great.
Perennial classic.
Awesome. Again, this is exactly like, right, this is the agencies talking to the folks. I mean, I know, this is what we need the discussion. Like we need the communication, whether you're a landowner or an agency. Mineral Creek, of course, is a totally different land agency, right? So we are also dealing with Forest Service and BLM have different management practices, policies. So the procedures are not the exact same in the different drainages. So we have to work through that. So I know that we're out of time, but I want to make sure that Jack can do the raffle. So folks online, thank you for coming. And folks here, if you got 2 more minutes. And then the last thing I did want to say, which I didn't because not everybody had been here, is I was thinking a lot today, and the chance that we're up here speaking, I just want to dedicate this to the fact that Bill Simon passed this week, and he was one of the original people who really was on the forefront of protecting the Animas River and forming the Animas River Stakeholders Group before a lot of us were here. And so just kind of acknowledging his legacy and saying, hey, he's not here, but we're trying to carry that on. So I just wanted to just say that before, and then I'll have Jack come up and do a couple of raffles. So I'm going to stop the talk, and then we're almost out of here. So thanks.
Thanks, everybody.